Hey Scooby fans, it's Joel coming at you from Planet Scooby with part 2 of my series of the Gothic Horror of Scooby-Doo. As I mentioned before, these are going to come out sporadically. My reviews will still come out every Saturday. And as I also mentioned in my first video, this is just kind of a build up to why I think the best Scooby-Doo episodes involve concepts lifted from Gothic horror, both in film and literature. In the first video, I introduced what Gothic horror was, at least briefly, and it was more just for people new to the idea of Gothic horror. And then I introduced the concept of the labyrinth, which is that huge scary castle or mansion that you often see in Gothic horror film and literature. And today we are going to discuss the concept of the hero villain, and we are going to discuss the concept of forbidden knowledge. Anyway, that's enough out of me. Let's roll the intro. The hero villain is the villain of the story who simply possesses enough heroic characteristics, such as charisma, good looks, or a sympathetic past, that he or she is more than simply the bad guy. The archetype for the hero villain is Lucifer, and not necessarily the biblical Lucifer, but more or less the version John Milton wrote about in his epic poem called Paradise Lost in 1667. In this poem, Lucifer is seen as a tragic figure as he's cast out of heaven due to his pride and envy. Before his fall, Lucifer was described as the greatest of God's creations and a bright morning star. And as revenge in that poem, Lucifer's goal is to corrupt mankind to eternal damnation through temptation.
The greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he didn't exist.
We can see that Lucifer template applied to Dracula.
The strength of the vampire is that people will not believe in him.
Dracula is a charming man. Women swoon over him and men admire him. We also have a touch of sympathy for him as he's incredibly lonely and has a disease where if he doesn't feed on blood, he dies. Yet if we fall into Dracula's temptation, we are either damned to become one of his playthings.
No, Master. I wasn't going to say anything. I told him nothing. I'm loyal to you, Master.
Rats.
Or killed. Author Anne Rice went on to further make us sympathetic towards vampires in her popular novel Interview with the Vampire. The vampire Lestat is seen as this charming and bombastic character who just parties it up and does whatever he wants. He just lives selfishly.
God kills indiscriminately, and so shall we.
While Louis, the other vampire, his companion, hated the idea of being a vampire. The concept of hero-villain is not just in Gothic storytelling, but it is in all sorts of classic stories and films such as Captain Hook and Peter Pan, Professor James Moriarty in Sherlock Holmes, Darth Vader in Star Wars, Jack Torrance in The Shining, Norman Bates in Psycho, and even Jason in Friday the 13th. These are characters we both admire and fear. They stand out from your regular villain. We've all read countless books and seen many TV shows where we barely remember the villain. But the hero villain, these are characters we both admire and fear. The admiration makes them more of a hero towards us. We wear them on t-shirts, we get tattoos of them, we collect toys based on their likeness and cosplay as them. But in our hearts, we know they are terrible people. We know they are villains. And if we were to run into them in real life, we'd fear for our very lives. If the concept of the hero villain is so prevalent, what makes Dracula Gothic but not the Joker from Batman? Or why is Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde considered Gothic but not Scar from The Lion King? I'd argue it's the third pillar of Gothic literature that I'm going to talk about next, which is the concept of forbidden knowledge of the supernatural. When we look at the villains in Scooby-Doo, many of them possess some sort of uncanny knowledge. Some have cheated death and come back to haunt us, such as the Black Knight, who comes to life during every full moon. Then there is the Puppet Master, who can possess a dummy and make it walk and talk like it were a living, breathing human. Elias Cotes can put a hex on you that prematurely ages you until you are nothing but bones. And Gramps the Vamp, well, he fits right in with Dracula and the vampire Lestat. We don't necessarily feel sympathy for many of these Scooby-Doo villains, nor are many of them that charming, yet they remain a hero-villain as they are perceived to possess so much supernatural power. Of course, they're just faking it until they make it, and eventually they get caught by Scooby and the gang, who reveal that these villains are just frauds. These hero villains have stuck in our mind for decades, and we refer to the episodes more by the villain than by the name of the episode itself. And very rarely do we even think about who is actually behind the monster itself. We often just think of that costume monster with all that supernatural power. And we celebrate their villainy as we admire their creativity and ambition, all the trouble they went through. We just think it's the greatest thing ever. We buy Funkos of them. We proudly wear them on our t-shirts. We color them in coloring books, and we buy blind bag toys of them. These hero villains even appear on cereal boxes. And it's all done in fun, as we'd never attempt to haunt an abandoned mine or deserted camping site ourselves. Yet if these characters existed in real life, we'd recognize them for being the terrible people that they truly are. As a side note, in the majority of Gothic literature, most of the forbidden knowledge had some sort of reasonable explanation as well. For example, The Hound of the Baskervilles, which is a Gothic Sherlock Holmes story involving lots of fog and a demonic dog, has a rational explanation. Frankenstein is also grounded in science. Not real science, mind you, as we cannot reanimate the dead, but within the scope of that particular universe, whether it be the novel or the movie, Dr. Frankenstein played God by using forbidden knowledge to bring his monster to life, and there was a rational explanation for it. Similarly, Dr. Jekyll used a chemical concoction to turn himself into Mr. Hyde, and the Phantom of the Opera was nothing really more than a man who used theater tricks and secret passages to deceive our eyes. Only Dracula and a handful of other books and classic Gothic movies use the supernatural as its true reasoning. And we see this mirrored in Scooby-Doo, where I'd say like 85% of its entire run over the decades is grounded in reality, and the remaining 15%, such as some of those scrappy episodes, or the Scooby-Doo on Zombie Island, or the Witch's Ghost, dive truly into the supernatural.
Drat! Well, back to tomato juice.
So that wraps up part 2 of my Gothic Horror of Scooby-Doo video series. Part 3 will come out in probably a month or so, I'm hoping. And we're going to talk about the final pillars of Gothic literature that I want to discuss at least, which include inclement weather, the damsel in distress, and the concept of inheritance. Anyway, until the next video, stay spooky.